All right. This is Vertical Farming Conversations. I'm Joe Coelho, Professor of Biosystems Engineering at the University of Arizona. This is the third season of Vertical Farming Conversations. Today, I'm joined by Bob Legault, who is the President and CEO at Vertical North, which is based in Toronto in Canada, and is joining us today from Toronto. Bob, welcome to the conversation.
Well, hi, Joel. It was great for having me.
Yes. So, Bob, I consider you to be one of the rare and somewhat hidden gems of the global vertical farming industry, on account of you having this understanding and expertise that can only be considered as multi-sectoral with respect to the industry, conferring you with a 360-degree view and understanding of the industry, which is unique or rare. So I'd like to ask you first, how did you get into the industry, the vertical farming industry? And then what experiences did you have that enabled you to have the 360-degree understanding of the industry?
Yeah, well, I started actually, I have a produce background, so I started in the produce industry about 2010, and that was just by luck. Wasn't into it. I was doing solar and wind installs, my own company,
All right.
and there was some dead time, and a friend of mine said his president that I'd met playing golf said, "Do you want to sell produce?" And they were looking for someone for downtown Toronto, which was kind of like the biggest area in Canada at the time, and I didn't know anything about produce, and I just said, why not? And so I got started with that, and I fell in love with produce. It's sounds stupid. It's not like the sexy thing, but I come from Niagara Lake, which is a agricultural town. It's a tourist attraction, but it's all agriculture down in the Niagara area.
All right.
A lot of my friends were farmers, so my sister bought a farm, so I was always around that. So now, I took it from I was the sales, selling to restaurants and chefs. There's a very passionate side to chefs. And, so I got to deal with them, and I got an understanding. And so it just brought a whole different side. And then from there, I started doing some work with the food terminal. So I got to see how things were bought at the food terminal, how from the farm to the food terminal, how that worked. And then from there, I started getting into the retailers. So I got to understand that, which was the retailers is kind of where, especially in the vertical farming, is where I find I'm more unique in that a lot of businesses don't have that side of their company. They have growers, they have the executives that come in, but they've kind of left that side, and that's a main part of understanding the retail side. And so I just started dealing with them, and then I'd spent some time in California at some of the larger farms, and I got to see how operations work. And that was through our company, a produce company. They sent me out to Taylor Farms was one of them. Dole was another one. And so I got to see how operations on a big scale. And that's where I saw a lot of food was, an issue. There was some droughts at the time. So some of the fields I was at, I could see there was problems. And, it always stuck in my head. And so I saw my first vertical farm when I was in China in 2007. It was a container farm. I thought it was like one of the coolest things. I was at this fair, and it always stuck in my mind. And in 2012, I came across podponics in Atlanta that I happened to check out. And, it just stuck in I thought that was the way to go. I thought it was just a futuristic thing at that point. And I just kind of, stuck with the produce. And then finally in 2017, I had an opportunity to start a farm through, again, luck. My best friend,
And you mean a vertical farm, yes?
a vertical farm,
Yeah.
yeah. My best friend actually said they're looking for a salesperson in produce, and he goes, maybe you should check it out because it was in my city.
Mm.
And he says, I think it's a vertical farm. What you've been looking at.
Mm.
So, he set it up. Guy called me, and that afternoon I went and talked to him and sat there for 4 hours, and hence we started a farm. And it was 4 walls, ceiling in a warehouse, and We designed it right from, day one. So, I had the ability and knowing how everything got put together on the ground
Mm,
floor.
mm,
And we did zip row towers then. So the tower system, kind of like what Plenty's doing.
yeah.
And so that, led into that, unfortunately it closed. We were doing herbs and we were selling to two major retailers.
Mhm.
So, I got to understand that from what we were doing, the costs, was a whole different, aspect of your traditional farm. And from there, I got asked to go to Acker Greens, which was a 40,000 square foot facility, hydroponic. And I was their fourth hire, and they had bought out another company, and so they had already had a system in place. And the thing is that there it just wasn't set up correct, right from the beginning. And that's one of the things I noticed is that you got to do things right from day one.
Mhm.
It's not like you can build it and then change it afterwards. So COVID hit, and so I was looking, and I looked at to do my own farm. I looked at cubic farms, and I had an investor, and we
Mhm.
looked into it. She was an economist for the British government. So when we went over their numbers, they weren't producing anything near what they could produce. And they were going to do a partnership with us, and then they kind of pulled out. So we just decided not to go ahead with it, but they hired me as a consultant. And so that was containers. And my job there was to go to their farms, you know deal with the operator, try and help them with operations, and see if we can be more efficient. So I did that. I went to their farms, and then they asked me if I'd help with a larger build,
Mhm.
calling it a hub. So I was involved right from, again, design, things like that. And I was offered the opportunity back in Toronto, because they were in Vancouver,
Mhm.
to be partners in a farm. And so the main investor at Acker Greens bought out Acker Greens and brought myself, my head grower, and our CEO on board to, start our own farm.
All right.
So that's it's kind of in and around, all around, description.
Yes, but that's fine. But that exposure to all of those different aspects of of the vertical farming industry, and then prior to that, you had experience with the traditional, conventional farming industry as well.
Yes.
Before we talk about the lessons that you learned that you would like to impart to our audience, talk a little bit about the market for the vertical farming industry. What have you
Yeah.
learned about the market, and then how would you distinguish that, if there's any distinction between vertical farming markets and the market from traditional farming?
Well, I think the like vertical farming can't compete with traditional prices.
Mhm.
It's or greenhouses for that matter. It's just very hard. I mean, the more north you go, like where I am in Canada, greenhouses slow down in the wintertime, obviously because of sunlight.
Mm.
And it's vertical farming is you just need to know your costs.
Okay.
That is the biggest thing. And dealing with the retailer is that we did things backwards. So we looked at what the price in the market is,
Mm.
and I would go and do my research and find out, okay, this is what the average price is in your local area. Go to a number of stores. And then I knew from dealing with them, they want to make a 40% margin, not a
Mm.
markup. So margins, a little bit more. And then if you got to know if they're dealing with a middleman, which I was dealing with the food terminal, and
Okay.
so they usually typically
And
take
for
it.
just for the information of our audience, the food terminal, you're referring to the Ontario Food Terminal,
Yes, in
right?
Toronto, yes.
Which is the main hub for produce distribution.
Yeah, it's one of the largest in North America.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there's a number of houses down there, anything from bananas to, peppers. There's,
Yeah.
most of the bigger players are
Yes.
down there. And a lot of the small guys who do restaurants, they're called jobbers, not this bigger, the bigger companies, but
Yeah.
they go down there in the morning, pick up their supply, and then they go deliver to the restaurants, and then
Right.
they have some bigger players as well.
Yeah.
So, but so they usually take a 20%. So right there off the top, there's 40% what the store wants, there's 25% the middleman wants if there is one. And then you have to figure out what your costs are.
Right.
And what we've found, or out there, is that there's a lot of bigger players out there that they try to get into the market.
Mm-hmm.
People think you can go low just to get into the market. Hey, we'll see how we're doing, and then we'll
Mm.
raise our price up. And unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way. Um, and as I've said quite a few times on LinkedIn, that's the only social media I'm on, is that the retailer has all the leverage, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, they say they want local, but at the end of the day, it's about their margin. They will, tell people they're about local and better product in that. But if you don't fit into
Yes.
their margin,
Yeah.
um, it doesn't matter.
So,
And
yeah. So, Bob, the question now is, with let's say that they have that 40% margin that they want to have, the grocery stores, and then you deal with a middleman at, let's say, at the
yes.
food terminal of what, 20% or so. Are you then able to meet those requirements and then make a profit?
Well, yeah. So for us, we were able to,
Okay.
because from working at the other farms, there's a lot of companies that don't account for every little detail. From
Mhm.
seeds to fertilizers, there's this. And so being at the other farms, we were able to take something from everything that we knew we had every
Right.
cost down. We knew what the electricity,
Yes.
was, even right down to the packaging. And what I say is that I know some people try to figure out their yields. They go, well, we're making so much per square meter or square foot. I prefer, and some other ones that I've talked to, we did it by the clamshell. So
Mhm.
that was our unit price. So so you take a look, if you're selling for your wholesale price to the retailer, if you're selling directly, for instance, if we're selling for 250, we would look at, what our costs were,
Yeah.
and we would make sure that, our clamshell price we were under, because you can make mistakes if you start doing it by the yield, or, how
Right.
some other ones,
Right.
factor out. But if you base it on the actual unit price of what you're selling, to me, that's the appropriate way to go.
And Bob, tell us what crops were you able to work out these calculations and make profit from?
Well, I mean, we were going down the kosher market.
Okay.
So that was, I mean, the thing is, before we didn't divulge that what we were doing, and now it's at the point where we know some bigger players have tried to go down the kosher market and have failed at it.
Hmm.
You go through the whole process, and it's not like you can have a farm and say, "Hey, let's go kosher." There's a lot more to it, because it's all about the bugs.
Right.
And the reason why is, when we looked at the market, I looked at it a few years ago, and that's the highest price point.
Mhm.
It's higher than organic, higher than natural. And so that's what we focused on, and that's where we could make our margins. And
Mhm.
because we were building from right from the beginning, it was easy for us to do this. And the reason why we did it is because our CEO had a pharmaceutical background,
Okay.
and he built pharmaceutical companies,
Right.
designed them that. So we took that premise of what he did at pharmaceutical, like even right down to the dust particle.
Mhm.
And so with his ability, we put it into the our farm.
Yes.
And
And
so
Bob,
thus it,
mhm.
yeah.
I'm sorry, with regard to the kosher market, so where is that concentrated in North America? I assume it's New York City and Toronto as well?
Yeah, so Toronto has an okay. Montreal has a larger, for the kosher market, but most of our supply was going to New York. It's the largest, in the U.S.
Yeah.
They were willing, and the other thing too is, we were lucky, they were willing to pick it up because they were looking for product.
Right.
And the other thing, I mean, what made us different too is, there's obviously kosher product out there, but typically they would get it from California, ship
Hmm.
it to New York, then they would have to clean it a certain amount of times. They were using like a food grade bleach, chlorine. They repackage it, it gets now the rabbi, has to pass it. And
Yeah.
then by the time it gets on a store shelf, the nutrients are gone, the crispness is gone because they've washed it with chemicals, and they were getting like a 2 day shelf life. So we were growing kosher, didn't
Yeah.
need to be washed. It went right into the package, and they could get it on their shelves within
Yeah.
24 to 36 hours.
Did you have the experience of selling to regular retailers in Canada or the Toronto area as well?
Yeah, so we did have a couple, like we were doing herbs for a while, and that was a big thing. And then we just got, like I said, we couldn't really do everything on the farm, and so we did have Whole Foods and some of the other players, but when it came to the margins, it only made sense for us to switch over to
Right.
the kosher market.
Yes, yes. Okay, so Bob, I mean, as you know, as our audience knows, the vertical farming industry is still in an early stage. It's still a fledgling industry in a way. And so there's a lot of mistakes that have been committed by players in the industry. And again, because of the fact that you've been around for about a decade or so in the industry, in different roles, in different phases or sectors of the industry, you've learned some really important lessons. So what are some of the key lessons that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Well, I think if you don't know anything about this industry, like even the produce or the vertical, I'd probably say stay out of it. Uh,
Okay.
but if you do go
Okay,
down the
but why
road,
do you say that? It seems clear, but tell us, elaborate.
well, I think, and we've had this, obviously conversation. There's trust issues out there right now
Yeah.
with certain consultants, with turnkey systems. There's a lot of fake numbers, greenwashing. I think,
Mhm.
in the industry, if when a group of us talk about it, it's very common.
Yeah.
So, it's the amount of money that it takes to do vertical farming. It's, obviously it's a lot higher capital,
Yeah.
and it's the thing is, you should know people in the retail business. You should have that knowing that whatever you grow, you think you can sell already.
Yeah.
If you're just going to build, don't really know the business and hope to, I think there's some heartache.
That is
uh
really key. It seems obvious, but some people, in a way, in practice, don't really do that. Like build it and they will come, kind of
yeah,
philosophy. Yes, but in business,
yeah,
that's not how it should be.
yeah. Yeah, like everyone thinks it's a cool idea. I mean, you talk to people going, "Oh, yeah, that is definitely the future." And I mean, I do believe that. I still believe in the vertical farming,
Mhm.
industry, even though um, I think a lot of the bad players or things that are being mentioned are starting to people are starting to find out about it. And I know capital's dried up right now, but I think there is a place, and I think it will be a big industry in the coming years.
Okay.
um,
All right.
I think there's enough of us that are very passionate about it, and
Right.
looking forward to the future with it.
All right. So what you're saying is that at first, before getting into the vertical farming space, one really needs to understand the market and other aspects of the industry to be able to
Yes.
navigate it successfully. All right.
Yes, I mean, I like, I found that, there's, and I've made comments about this, that, a lot of growers are out there, they know what they're doing, and they go down this road, and they start getting bigger. And then some executives, the investors say, well, we need to bring in more experienced people. We're expanding in this. And what I found through, some of the companies I was at, that they don't understand the business, and they want to take it down another direction. And sometimes they don't listen to the grower, and a lot of times they think selling is easy. And knowing the industry, that what, I can pick this up. I'll just call Kroger's. I'll just call Loblaws up here, or we'll get in the door. They're going to say, "Hey, we got a vertical farm, and we've got this."
Right.
Doesn't really work that way.
Right. It's a business. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So what other lessons would you like to share?
Well, I think when it comes to, knowing your design and your, what you want to grow, what I've always said is, when you build your farm, make sure you can pivot. that, because anything can change. I mean, one day you might be growing a certain product and a demand comes for another one, or your product's not doing as well, that your farm is able to switch over right away.
Yeah.
I do know of some farms that haven't been able to pivot,
Hmm.
and
Right.
kind of when you start off, you got to do it right. It's kind of like with the pricing with the retailers. When you go in there, make sure you got your price that you're happy with,
Okay.
and that I always put a buffer on top of that, because electricity could go up over 5 years. Labor or different things could happen. So when you do your price, you want to make sure that you can withstand any kind of change that can happen, say within the next
Right.
3 to 5 years,
So
because
Bob, you mentioned that for some growers, when they suddenly have to switch produce, they're not able to do that, but others are able to. So what
yeah.
prohibits then the ones who are not able to switch from switching? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, it's just a farm design. I mean, because you could be, because there's certain things, like when we grow things, we won't grow heads. We don't have the ability with our system. So we're doing leafy greens.
Yeah, yeah.
And so just with that, that example, I mean, that's how people could, you know, falter, I guess, if they ever want to switch. We just knew our market and we weren't really worried. Like, we could go to herbs, we could go to certain other things, but we couldn't do heads.
Yeah.
But some other companies can't even really switch product.
All right.
So that's, a downfall for them.
Okay. And is the architecture of the vertical farming growing system, does that play a significant role in that flexibility?
Yeah, like, I mean, we're a hybrid as well. Well, like we're saying about the farmer to farm, we're a hybrid that, from taking from the containers to warehouses,
Yeah.
we went in between with smaller rooms. We just figured that way it was easier to control the climate. And that's the other thing with pivoting, is that your climate, once you set up your HVAC, your lighting, things like that, that might not work with different crops. So, I mean, especially, I mean, you're not going to go from lettuce to strawberries, in the
Mm.
same
Mhm.
farm, but so your whole climate and how that
Oh,
that works, and the other thing I always said is, HVAC is just as important as lighting. I don't hear enough about the HVAC, but
okay.
I know when we did our farm, it was pretty much a 50-50. HVAC to lighting was the same cost.
Right. Oh, this is interesting because you're saying that you have a warehouse, but you've got rooms inside that warehouse.
Yes.
And that's how you operated. And so it seems clear to me now, but please articulate what are the advantages of that, of going that way?
Well, I just for like our biosecurity, it's like
Yeah.
a building inside a building,
Correct.
and
Yes.
so that just gave us the ability for anything that can come in.
Uh-huh.
I've been to see other farms, and I see bugs, and because we were kosher, obviously we had to be
Yeah.
more protective.
Right.
But we designed it so that our when people even came into the building, they had to
Mhm.
go a certain way, so they were never interacting. We had air showers, in
Yes.
certain areas, that they had to go through. They would never even be close to any outdoor areas. Like, we even had
Mhm.
another wall, so
Right.
we just protected ourselves as much as possible. And
Yeah.
smaller rooms, actually, it's easier to control than large warehouses.
In terms of the
Uh,
environment, yes.
yes.
Yeah. And is what about the economic consideration for that? Is it more economically efficient?
Well, in the long run, yes. At the
Mhm.
beginning, for capital, because we would need more HVAC,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
but the lighting didn't really matter, because we were looking at, we had 7 tiers, and if we did a larger farm, it'd still be 7 tiers. The lighting would still be exactly the same.
Right.
It was more so for the environment. We were able to control. I mean, we were right down to even water temperatures, doing different things with the water itself. And but just like I said, it's a little bit more expensive because there's more rooms, there's more cooler panels. Um, but other than that, we just figured it was the safest way to go.
Do you see any advantage to that in terms of scaling production? Or like during times when you don't have to use the entire volume of the warehouse to meet the production demand that you're trying to meet?
Um, as in what do you mean?
Like, for example, I mean, typically in the warehouse, you'd like to use the entire space, but
Oh,
there
yes.
are times when the amount of production that you have does not require using the entire volume of space. So with you,
Yes.
then, does that play into the advantage of having those rooms?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the difference with the difference rooms too is that if there ever was an outbreak or anything
Mhm.
could occur,
Okay.
we're limiting any problems.
Yeah.
So if one room we had to close it down for a reason, we still had that ability to have the other. Like we had 9 rooms,
Right.
we'd have 8 rooms still because they were totally separate. We didn't keep anything the same. Even the water, nothing was mixing with each room that was going throughout the whole farm.
Right.
So, we could mitigate any problems with a large warehouse. Obviously, more things can happen. You could lose the whole crop.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so if you and the other thing too is being on the produce side of it is that your retailer does not want to be shorted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest issues because if your whole warehouse went down, I mean, by the time you reseed, do everything, I mean, you're looking at 4 or 5 weeks possibly. So
You're
it
right.
it does affect your customers.
So, Bob, here's the question, because you are essentially using a facility that is a hybrid of a warehouse and let's say the shipping containers or the modular
Yeah.
units. So why not just go with the modular units? What's the rationale behind that?
For us, we just want to build everything ourselves, just from the little things that we learn from different farms. So
Right.
by doing it the way we're doing it, we could tweak little things,
Got it.
that you can't necessarily do in a container or a larger warehouse. So
Mhm.
we just felt it was easier to do what we were doing. It was less expensive than buying because you can buy these
Yeah.
modules.
Right.
And then again, you're going with what their technology is.
Right.
And I think the advantage we had is from what we did, we built it from the ground up.
Mhm.
So, there's a lot of things that we didn't have to buy that other people
Yes.
would buy, we actually made, or
Right.
we could, manufacture ourselves. So we had that advantage from obviously the experience at different farms.
Yes. Bob, we have 10 minutes remaining, but do you have a third lesson that you'd like to impart?
Yeah, I think is you just need to know your costs.
Okay.
That's another thing I think a lot of farms are failing at
Yeah.
is that you better know your costs at the beginning again. Like everything is that I know I keep on saying it, but before you start selling, you do need to know your cost.
Right.
Like what we did, I mean, we knew it
Or
from
maybe
just the
even before you start producing, you got to know your costs, perhaps.
Oh, yes. I mean, right from, what product you're growing,
Yeah,
certain products will like spinach, for instance. I mean, you need a chiller to cool the water.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's obviously an expense. That some people think they're just going to. I know at the one farm I was at Acker Greens, they tried to at the very beginning because before we brought our grower in, their grower who came from a greenhouse didn't quite know it was a lot different,
Right,
and
right.
he was in the cannabis space.
Yeah.
So to come to what we were
Mhm.
doing is totally different, and so he was not aware of the chiller. And
Mhm.
we kept on saying that this is what you do need. So that, I mean, that's just for one
Right,
instance.
right.
So if you
Yes,
don't have that available, you're cutting out spinach.
that's right. Yeah. So,
you
so
know
bottom line is that there is no such thing as vertical farming exceptionalism, if you will, when it comes to business and economics. It is governed by
yeah.
the same rules of economics.
Yes. I mean, our the other thing too is besides knowing your costs is you have to know your market.
Right.
One of my pet peeves is I see some there's the turnkey systems, and they explain, ROIs. And they could be in a country, but they're telling you what the ROI is. Could be in the States, and they could be in England, for instance.
Yeah.
And different market, different demand,
Right.
different costs of the building,
Yeah.
different costs of labor. So I'm always, know your market, know exactly what
Yeah.
you're getting into. Hire the right people. I mean,
Hmm.
that's that is another big thing.
Hmm. Right. Right.
So it just saves you a lot of headaches.
Yes. So, having encountered and witnessed, the challenges, the turbulence that the vertical farming industry experienced relatively recently, which is really an adjustment to the industry. How optimistic do you feel about the industry going forward? And I guess for North America, since we're in North America.
I feel pretty good. I think I think we're in a time right now. There's soil depletion is not talked about a lot. So besides droughts and obviously in California there's a lot of fires, which does affect the produce, even if it's not the ash. There's different things like that that
Mm.
crops are not used. I do see more problems with that. I think greenhouses, like I always like to separate greenhouses from vertical farming.
Yes.
They're totally two different aspects.
Right.
But I just see that in more up north, as electricity prices, or they're giving some tax breaks now on certain things like that, and I think our costs are coming down. I think it's the way to go. It's just, again, it's more capital expense, costly at the very beginning, and I think investors will eventually come back online. I think a lot of the bad players are being weeded out, and I just think it's very bright.
All right, wonderful. And with that note, thank you so much, Bob Legault, for joining me today.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks, Joel. Thanks for having me.
All right.